Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the latest in deck technology. And for today's deck tech, we're going to be looking at a special event that's going on right now in Arena, and it is involving one of my personal favorite events, Historic Artisan. So this is a festival event. As you can see above, it just says collect your favorite team up style cards in the Historic Artisan Festival. You bring a 60 card deck using only commons, uncommons, and basic lands from any set in Arena. Without rares, the common folk can truly be heard. Now, if you know me, I absolutely love Historic Artisan. It's actually one of my favorite formats to play in Arena whenever it's available. So we're going to have fun today. We're going to do a very short but sweet deck tech on a deck that you can take into the event to get you your wins and also have a lot of fun along the way. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content so you don't miss out on any of the gameplay, booster pack openings, deck decks, and so much more. So you're probably wondering, what does it mean when you say Artisan Mill? Well, as you can see on screen right now, we're definitely going to be playing a mill deck to get to our win. And once this combo goes off, it is hilarious when it does. Real quick, however, let's look at the stats of the decks overall. You're looking at basically a 12 creature, 20 non-creature package with an average mana curve of about 2.1. We're in Simic colors with a perfectly even ratio of 20 and 20 on both sides. As for specifics, you will use 16 instants and 4 enchantments with a whopping, 28 lands. But you're definitely going to need them because we are going to be relying on those landfall triggers. Now, as for the deck and how we're going to try to get to victory, it is very simple and easy to understand. We're going to try to, of course, get out either one of our crabs, which is Ice Crab Cancrix or Ruin Crab. As you can see, both of them have a pseudo landfall trigger. The Ruin Crab basically reads whenever a land enters the battlefield, each opponent mills 3 cards. As for the Iceberg Cancrix, it just says whenever a snow permanent enters the battlefield under our control, we can have target player mill 2 cards. The wording's a little bit different from them, but it still works out the same. Basically, we want to try to get as many snow lands out onto the field, and of course, we're going to ride that to victory. However, we do want to make sure that we have other ways of getting the triggers, and of course, we will utilize a simple but hilarious combo to go off. As you can see, the other creature we're going to use is Risen Reef. Risen Reef is a 3 mana elemental creature with a 1/1 toughness and power that reads whenever it enters the battlefield or another elemental also enters the battlefield under our control, look at the top card of our library. If it's a land card, you could put it onto the battlefield tap. If you don't put the card onto the battlefield, you put it into your hand. So very simple. Basically, once this card is out, hopefully that should start triggering off a bunch of landfalls that'll then hit our crabs, which will then force our opponent to mill out the rest of their deck. But what if we can take this a step further? Well, we also have an additional card for that to give us another way to get to victory. Zendikar Royal. This 5 mana enchantment has landfall, and it reads whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 2/2 green elemental creature token. So you're probably thinking to yourself, I know exactly where he's going with this.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
And you are correct. Basically, plan A to the deck is just mill them out the old-fashioned way with our crabs. The Risen Reef will trigger off Zendikar's Royal, which basically means that whenever that land hits the battlefield, the Ruined Crabs will mill out our opponent. At the same time, with the landfall trigger with Risen Reef out and Zendikar's Royal, it'll create an elemental, which will then go back to Risen Reef and repeat the cycle until our opponent is finished off. There are going to be some moments where you might kind of fizzle out for a moment because either you don't hit enough landfall triggers or you get one of our other additional support spells, but that's not a bad thing. Remember, in Historic Artisan, we don't have to worry too much about wraths, so we're just going to try to focus on trying to mill out our opponent as fast as possible once we get the combo set up. As for your support to make sure this deck goes well, you'll have Consider as your draw spell, and Growth Spiral also draws a card, but also it allows us to put another land onto the battlefield, which will allow us to keep this whole combo going. As for ways to protect what we're trying to do, you will use Tameo Safekeeping, which ideally you want to use on any one of your key pieces that you need to ensure that you can go off. So either protect your Risen Reef, protect your Cancrix, protect your other crabs. If you have to, you can also use it for the Royal, but mostly you want to protect one of your creatures that you have. If your opponent is going to go super wide, then we're going to use Haste of Pollen in the main deck to prevent all combat damage from going through. This is mostly, again, those enemy goblin decks out there, enemy elf decks, basically the decks that go super wide that might try to overrun us before we can get all of our elementals out. If you don't need it, the other sweet part about it is it has cycling for 3. It's a little expensive to cycle for 3, but remember we are land heavy, so that usually means it's pretty easy to pay for that. And then finally, as far as how many lands you're doing, as I mentioned earlier, it's a big landfall deck, so we're using 9 snow-covered islands, 9 snow-covered forests, some Rimewood Falls as your only dual land that's snow-based. Broker's Hideout will then automatically trigger off, so even if they come in tapped, they will still trigger by allowing us to dig for more lands, which will of course keep the cycle going. And again, against other enemy opponents out there that are trying to do any kind of shenanigans with their their lands, we have Field of Ruin to also help manually hit the trigger off if we need to. You're probably noticing right now, we have some cards off to the side here. I know we don't have a sidebar for this because this is all the best of one event, so hear me out for a second. The deck actually has a lot of different kinds of ways you can tweak it if you really like this style, but if you don't care about any of this stuff, the core that you see on screen right now is perfectly suitable, and just remember that no matter how you cut it, it's an incredibly hilarious deck once it goes off. Remember, with Historic Artisan, your biggest concern, of course, is to protect any one of your single pieces from getting destroyed before your combo can goes off, so make sure to take advantage of those Tamiyo safe even and only hold them when you absolutely have to protect what you need. The only other big weakness to the deck is, remember that most of our cards are still susceptible to exile effects, so if we have to deal with the mass exile, the only card that really does that is, oh, I believe it's what? Cry of the Carnarium? I think that's the only card that can actually destroy our whole game plan, so keep that in mind, of course, if you are going to play this deck. Still, my only other final thoughts before we wrap this whole mini deck tech up is, if you are a fan of fun combo decks out there, if you're a fan of the landfall trigger ability or milling out your opponent to get to victory, heck, if you're like me and you just like Historic Artisan just because it's a nice change of pace from dealing with tier 1 decks out there in the ranked formats, I would definitely say have fun with this event if you're playing it, and be sure to give this deck a try. And I assure you, when you mill out your whole opponent with just almost near infinite triggers and forcing them to basically concede on the spot, you will not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.